The alarm rang at 5:30 in the morning, as it did religiously every day. Michael Bennett opened his still tired eyes, staring at the white ceiling of his modest suburban home in Atlanta, Georgia. At 39 years old, Michael was chief operating officer of a promising digital security company called Secure Wave Solutions. Despite his executive position and financial success, he maintained a humble, disciplined routine, born of years of struggle and sacrifice. Rising slowly, he slipped on his worn slippers and walked to the window. The sky was still dark, heralding another cold November day, but Michael loved that early silence before the world rushed back to life. After a quick shower, he put on a light blue dress shirt and his favorite charcoal gray suit, attire he reserved for important meetings. The fresh aroma of newly brewed coffee greeted him in the kitchen, where his wife, Angela, was already preparing breakfast. "Big day today, isn't it?" she asked gently, handing him a steaming cup. He smiled and nodded. He was about to fly to New York City to present a groundbreaking digital security project at an international convention. Michael had been working on that presentation for months, convinced it could propel not only his company, but also his personal career to new heights. The drive to Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport was short, but that morning Michael chose to take it slow, mentally rehearsing the key points of his talk as he navigated the still empty streets. When he arrived, he made a point of greeting every airport employee he passed, from the parking attendant to the check-in security guard, acknowledging the value of each person in the human chain that serves millions of travelers every day. He did it not for recognition or habit, but because he vividly remembered the tough times when he himself had worked as an overnight security officer while studying to earn his degree in information technology. Once inside the terminal, Michael bought an espresso and walked toward his gate, reviewing his slides one last time on his tablet. He was flying first class, a choice he made on long trips, not out of vanity, but because he needed the comfort and quiet to focus on work. Boarding the plane, he quickly found his spacious, comfortable seat. As he settled in, Michael noticed curious glances from fellow passengers. It was no surprise. As a black man in a predominantly white corporate environment, he was used to noticing looks of surprise or even suspicion. Yet he never let them affect his demeanor or dignity. Little did he know, this flight would be very different from any he had taken before. A few minutes after Michael had gotten comfortable and was reviewing his documents, he noticed unusual movement near the aisle. An elegant blonde woman appearing to be in her 50s was speaking quietly with a flight attendant. Though her voice was low, Michael caught phrases like, "I always sit in that seat. I've been platinum for years," and he clearly belongs somewhere else. Immediately, Michael felt a familiar tightening in his chest. He understood the situation unfolding, but he chose to remain calm, hoping it was a simple misunderstanding that would be cleared up quickly. It wasn't long before the attendant, a young woman named Lauren, approached him with a polite yet strained smile. "Mr. Bennett, I'm so sorry, but we need to relocate you to another seat. We have a frequent flyer who always occupies this particular spot," she explained in a tone that tried to be friendly, but betrayed the expectation that he would simply stand and move. Michael took a deep breath, feeling the eyes of other passengers now fixed on him, waiting for the scene to play out. "I understand," he replied calmly, "but this is exactly the seat I reserved, and I'm also a platinum member," he added, showing his boarding pass with quiet confidence, hoping the mix-up would be sorted out. Lauren looked surprised for a moment, quickly, glancing back at the impatient passenger behind her. She returned her focus to Michael, her tone now firmer. "I understand, sir, but this particular passenger insists on sitting here. It would be much easier if you just moved to another seat." The condescending edge in her voice sparked a familiar sting of indignation in Michael, one he knew well but always worked to control. Before he could respond, the passenger herself interrupted in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "This is ridiculous. He clearly doesn't belong in first class." Those words hit Michael hard, though they were not new to him. He had faced similar prejudice countless times in his life, whether in professional settings or personal encounters. Yet now, in the cabin of an important first-class flight surrounded by curious onlookers, the humiliation felt sharper. Controlling his emotions, he answered calmly but firmly, "I'm sorry, but I can't move. I chose this seat so I could work during the flight. I'm not bothering anyone. I only ask that you respect what is rightfully mine." The cabin fell into a heavy silence. Michael saw the tension on Lauren's face as the blonde woman muttered something about speaking to the flight manager. Moments later, the situation escalated beyond anything Michael could have imagined. A cabin supervisor named Eric strode down the aisle toward him, flanked by Lauren and the passenger who had sparked the commotion. Eric's face was hard and authoritative, as if determined to show who was in charge. Without ceremony, he announced loudly, "Mr. Bennett, we need you to vacate that seat immediately. It's reserved for our frequent premium customers." The words landed like a verdict, and Michael felt the weight of every gaze in the cabin. The blonde woman, who Michael had heard called Mrs. Hamilton, wore a look of superiority, watching with a faintly mocking smile. Nearby passengers began murmuring, clearly unsettled by the raw unfairness playing out before them. Michael felt his blood rise. This public humiliation had gone too far. With calm resolve, he responded, "I've already explained. I have a valid ticket. I'm a platinum member, and there is no legitimate reason for me to give up the seat I reserved." His dignity, however, meant nothing to the supervisor, whose stance only grew more rigid. Eric leaned in, lowering his voice, but still loud enough for those nearby to hear. "Sir, maybe you don't understand how things work here, but this is your final request. Either you leave peacefully or we will have to remove you from the aircraft." The veiled threat stunned Michael for a few seconds. A mix of shame and anger surged through him. After all his effort to succeed, he hadn't expected to face this in public, yet contrary to what Eric likely anticipated, Michael refused to submit. He looked him in the eye and said in a steady voice, "I haven't done anything wrong. I will not leave this seat." At that moment, the supervisor made a quick gesture toward the crew phone, summoning security discreetly. Michael's heart pounded. He could scarcely believe the absurdity of it all. Around him, a few passengers pulled out their phones, filming the confrontation with growing concern. When two security officers entered the cabin and walked straight to his seat, Michael felt profoundly humiliated and powerless. It was hard to understand how, despite his education, effort, and achievements, he could still be subjected to such blatant injustice. Slowly he rose, gathering his belongings, his heart heavy, while fellow passengers watched in silent discomfort as he was escorted away. As he was led down the narrow aisle, Michael kept his head held high, though inside he felt crushed by familiar pain. Each step toward the exit stirred memories of a life he thought he left behind. He recalled being followed by store security as a teenager simply for being there, of job applications ignored until he changed the photo on his resume. Most of all, he remembered his father, a simple, dignified man who always said, "Son, the world will try to bend you, but never bow your head to what's wrong." His father died too young, the victim of a medical error never fully investigated, and that silent grief had driven Michael to become someone who could spark real change. Once in the terminal's secure area, the security officers, clearly uncomfortable, seemed to realize something was amiss. "Mr. Bennett, we're sorry. We're just following orders, but you do have a valid boarding pass, right?" one asked cautiously. Michael nodded, handing over his documents and ticket. There was a moment of hesitation among the agents. One left the room, presumably to verify his status, while the other looked at Michael as though he were beginning to grasp the enormity of what had just occurred. The tension hung thickly in the air, but Michael remained composed. He took out his phone and began recording an audio memo, detailing dates, names, tones, expressions, every word spoken. It was more than a record. It was his way of ensuring his voice would be heard this time. Minutes later, his assistant Rebecca called to say that videos of his removal were already circulating online. Several passengers had recorded and shared the scene in outrage. Michael exhaled slowly. He knew this humiliating moment could become a catalyst for something bigger. Shortly after, his longtime friend and business partner Nathan Carter arrived at the airport. Nathan, SecureWave's general counsel, didn't waste a second. "Let's use every bit of this. This happens every day, but today they picked the wrong man." Michael nodded subtly. More than ever, he knew that how he reacted in the coming hours could transform not only his own pain, but the fate of many others. When they returned to SecureWave's headquarters, Michael was greeted by applause from his employees, who had already seen the videos and read the online accounts. The atmosphere was one of outrage, but also solidarity. Angela embraced him as soon as he walked through the door that evening. "They have no idea who they messed with," she said firmly. But Michael knew the battle was just beginning, and this time he would not let it pass unchallenged. The next morning, promptly at 8 o'clock, Michael joined a video conference with the board of Atlantic Air, the airline responsible for the incident. Its CEO, Gerald Thompson, a slow-speaking, polished man, tried to maintain a conciliatory tone. "Mr. Bennett, we want to express our deepest regret for what happened. It was an error, and we will take appropriate action." But Michael was not interested in generic apologies. With measured precision, he replied, "An error is something unexpected. This was a choice, it was policy. Institutional responsibility is clear." A heavy silence followed. Thompson cleared his throat, searching for words, as the other directors exchanged embarrassed glances. Michael then shared the screen, playing the passenger shot footage from different angles of the humiliation he endured, the attendant's insistence, the reactions of other travelers, the security officer's arrival. But the most shocking evidence came next. One recording showed Mrs. Hamilton slipping an envelope of cash to Supervisor Eric immediately after leaving the cabin. "If this isn't a bribe to enforce discrimination, then we need to redefine our terminology," Michael said, pausing the video on the exact frame. Where the money passed hands, the board members turned pale. Thompson tried to argue for an internal investigation, but Michael cut him off. "I hold 18% of Atlantic Air's shares, as you all know. Alongside my partners, I can call an extraordinary shareholders meeting by week's end. You can take responsibility now, or you can brace for the impending collapse of your stock price." His threat was real. Reports already showed a 9% drop since the morning, and international media coverage was mounting. Faced with the very real risk of a financial and institutional meltdown, the airline's leadership capitulated. Within 48 hours, the 3 employees directly involved, Eric, Lauren, and the flight captain, were terminated. Mrs. Hamilton, the preferred passenger, received official notice of her permanent ban from Atlantic Air flights. The airline held a public press conference to offer a formal apology, acknowledge the discriminatory act, and announce an unprecedented internal reform. Yet Michael wasn't satisfied with a theatrics-only response. He demanded genuine cultural change from the inside out. Days later, Michael presented a detailed structural overhaul proposal to Atlantic Air. Together with his team of technology and organizational culture experts, he unveiled an intensive institutional re-education program called Level 1: Humanity Before Rank. It wasn't another corporate pamphlet, but an immersive course leveraging artificial intelligence to simulate real-world scenarios of discrimination, unconscious bias, and abuse of power. Every employee, from the CEO to the baggage handlers, would undergo the training before returning to duty. The board balked at the high cost and the 72-hour operational suspension, but Michael stood firm. "Either you prove you learned something, or you prove you only know how to hide behind apologies." Internal reactions were mixed. Some staff felt personally accused by this collective reckoning. Others saw an opportunity to join a larger movement. Sessions began in small groups, with organizational psychologists and diversity facilitators guiding them. Participants experienced simulated cases of racism, misogyny, and class discrimination, often from the victim's perspective. In one exercise, white employees had to resolve an overbooking dispute while being treated with disdain, mirroring Michael's own ordeal. The discomfort was intense, but precisely what made it effective. Despite his packed schedule, Michael made time to attend the first sessions at each operational site. He sat in on discussions, listened closely, and candidly shared how that flight had impacted him. "Do you think the worst part was being removed from the plane?" It wasn't. It was seeing how natural it all seemed, how nobody there thought they were doing anything wrong. His tone was not vengeful, but painfully honest. He sought transformation, culture, structures, and most importantly, minds. Gradually, public perception of Atlantic Air shifted. Media stories praised the airline's courage to confront its own failures and act responsibly. Passengers reported improved experiences. Employees spoke of a new, more empathetic workplace. Michael watched from afar, eschewing fanfare. He didn't want credit. The change itself was reward enough. He knew he couldn't erase what happened to him, but he could ensure that moment became a turning point, not of humiliation, but of renewal. And for him, that was more than enough. 3 months after the incident, Michael received a formal invitation to attend a symbolic ceremony at Atlantic Air's headquarters in New Jersey. It would mark the completion of the first phase of Level 1, by which time over 8,000 employees had been trained and new internal protocols were in place. He was to present the first 3 pilot program graduates with their certificates, a gesture that, though symbolic, signified the company's cultural rebirth. Angela hesitated when she saw the invitation on their kitchen table. "Are you sure you want to go back there?" she asked. Michael smiled. "This time it's not about me, it's about everyone else." At the ceremony, the atmosphere was solemn, yet electric. Michael took the stage in the same suit he'd worn the day he was expelled from that plane, a deliberate reminder. In his speech, he spoke truths without flinching. Prejudice never arrives shouting. It slips in quietly, hidden in the fabric of our systems, and if left unexposed, it grows until it becomes the rule. The audience listened in hushed reverence. Some wept, others nodded in reflection. When the speeches ended, he handed certificates to 3 standout employees: a young flight attendant who had challenged a racist supervisor, a ground technician who designed an inclusive protocol for passengers with disabilities, and a veteran pilot who admitted he'd once ignored misconduct for fear of backlash, but was now leading bias awareness workshops. Michael did not stay for the reception. He slipped out quietly and caught a return flight to Atlanta that very day. Boarding the plane, he noticed something that warmed his heart. No one looked at him oddly as he settled into first class. The attendant greeted him with a genuine smile and offered him lemon-infused water. "Welcome home, Mr. Bennett," she said. It was not mere politeness, it was sincerity. And for a man who'd long had to prove his right to be there, that simple gesture meant everything. He sat back, closed his eyes for a moment, and savored a rare, hard-won peace. Back at the office, his team welcomed him with subdued excitement, as if they knew he'd faced something far greater than a petty injustice. He'd confronted an entire system. On his desk, he found an envelope containing a handwritten letter from one of the trainees. "I never thought I'd hear someone like you speak about what it's like to be on the other side. Thank you for not giving up on us." Michael sat down, read the letter twice, and placed it in his top desk drawer alongside other mementos of his journey. He knew he would never forget that one in particular. 6 months after the life-altering episode and the transformation of one of the nation's largest airlines, Michael launched the Horizons First Foundation, an initiative to combat institutional bias and promote equal access to positions of power for Black, Latino, and other minority communities. Its mission was clear: turn pain into structure. Each month, the Foundation awarded scholarships to promising technology and business students, offered free ethics and compliance courses to corporations, and provided inclusion training for industries long marked by exclusion: aviation, finance, technology. Michael did not simply aim to correct what had harmed him. He sought to prevent others from suffering the same fate. He also began speaking at universities, conferences, and corporate events, not to tout himself, but to underscore the value of integrity, the strength of self-control, and the importance of action when one is at a disadvantage. At one lecture, a young black student asked, "How did you manage not to lose it on that plane?" Michael smiled and answered, "Because if I'd lost it, that outburst would have defined who I am. But I knew it wasn't about what they did to me. It was about what I chose to do with it." The audience rose in applause. Here was a man who refused to be bent by injustice, who used every cruel word and hurtful action as fuel to build something greater. As Atlantic Air emerged as a global model of ethical reinvention, posting record customer satisfaction gains and 22% growth in 1 year, Michael remained steadfast in his decision not to reinvest in the airline. "Not because they didn't change," he said, "but because my role was to spark the change, not to claim the trophy." Still, the current CEO, elevated after Gerald Thompson's resignation, continued to consult him regularly on policy and strategy. And though he kept an institutional distance, Michael knew he had left an indelible mark. Today, Michael Bennett is remembered not just as the executive who was unjustly removed from a flight, but as the man who turned a public offense into a collective movement for change. His story has crossed borders, featured in books, documentaries, and educational campaigns on ethics and inclusion. But for him, the most meaningful measure lies beyond headlines. Every respectful glance he now receives entering a room, Every young person who feels represented by his journey, and every individual who can now fly, literally or metaphorically, secure in the knowledge that they belong wherever they have earned their place with dignity.